Thank you all so much for joining us for the International Institute's Globally Engaged Career Panel. We've already determined that this is definitely the last time we're going to be on Zoom, so thank you for adding one more Zoom event to your calendars. All of our panelists are graduates or were affiliates of U of M's area studies programs and have gone on to pursue career paths with a global reach. So we hope this will be helpful for you all as you think about your future career paths.
Thanks, Sam. And thank you so much to our panelists for making the time across multiple time zones to share their expertise and experiences with us, and for adapting to this virtual environment that we've all been adapting to in the past year. Thank you also so much to the Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies and the Masters in International and Regional Studies program, of which Sam and I are students, for hosting today's event, and especially to Alana Rodriguez and Gabrielle Graves for pulling this all together. Generous support for this event comes from the following centers and programs: the Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies, the Masters in International and Regional Studies program, the Lieberthal Rodgel Center for Chinese Studies, the Center for Middle Eastern and North African Studies, the Center for Russian, East European and Eurasian Studies, the Center for Southeast Asian Studies, the Center for South Asian Studies, the Nam Center for Korean Studies, the Center for Japanese Studies, and the International Institute. And this event is funded in part by Title VI National Resource Center grants from the U.S. Department of Education.
So we're going to begin by asking each panelist to introduce themselves to start the conversation. And then we will ask a couple questions directed to all the panelists, and then one question specifically for each panelist. And as we're going along, please feel free to submit questions in the chat, and we'll ask those at the end as time allows. So we'll begin with Frank Hennick.
Sure, thank you. I'm Frank Kenick, and I was a master's student at Michigan from 2011 to 2013 in the Center for Russian, East European, and Eurasian Studies. And now I'm in St. Paul, Minnesota, where I work for an organization called CAPI USA that provides kind of a full range of human services for immigrants and refugees in the Twin Cities metro.
Thanks so much, Frank. Emily, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Emily Etue. I was at U of M from 2010 to 2012. I have a Master of Science in Environmental Policy and Planning from the School of Natural Resources and Environment. And I also have a graduate certificate from the Center for Southeast Asian Studies. From 2012 to 2018, I was based in Bangkok. Half of my time working for an international nonprofit organization working called the Center for People and Forests, working to give land rights for local communities that depend on forests. And then the second half, I worked in private sector doing philanthropy for a luxury tour company. And it's really great to be here.
Awesome, thank you. Evan?
Howdy, my name's Evan. I attended the University of Michigan from 2011 to 2015. And I double majored. One of my programs was the International Studies program, which is in the International Institute. And I also majored in German. So schönen guten Tag for those who can say hello in German. And after 2015, I started working at the university. And in 2018, I came back to the International Institute to work in student services. And there's a variety of things that I support here, including some events. And I work with beautiful colleagues like Sam and others who are putting this event on. So thank you.
Thank you, Evan. And Lydia.
Sure, yeah, I graduated from the University of Michigan Ford School in 2012. And I also minored in the program in the environment and Russian. After that, I went to China to do a Fulbright there. I also took Chinese at the University of Michigan. And then I did a Princeton in Asia Environmental Law Fellowship, and then I stayed on to do environmental journalism in China. When Trump was elected, I moved back to the US to work as a reporter here, and that's what I'm doing now. I work as a freelance reporter for WNYC for a show called The Takeaway. It's a national show. And then I also write for Gothamist. So I focus mainly on environmental and climate reporting. So anyone who's interested in that, or Chinese and Russian, I can probably answer questions in those areas.
So cool, thank you. All right, so let's get started with questions. Our first question has to do with just kind of getting started in your career. It's become increasingly common for professionally successful individuals to have many different jobs over the course of their career. Can you each tell us a little bit about your professional trajectory, including how your humanities or social science background led you into the professional world, and how you navigated transitions from there? Did you start out with a clear idea of what you wanted to do, and how did that idea change over time? So to start, I'll go back to Lydia.
Sure. First of all, thank you all, everyone who's watching, for being here. I feel like this is one of the most important topics to think about, because once you're in a job, you're going to be spending like a large portion of your day doing that job, and a large portion of your life, contributing your time, which is your most valuable resource, towards doing that job. So to me, it's a really, really important to be really thoughtful and strategic about it. In terms of, did I know what I was going to do? Yes and no. I feel like my career plan has always been a plan, but it's always been in pencil. And I'm constantly like erasing it and modifying it. So I started out with a passion for doing international work and a passion for the environment. So that kind of, that idea led me to China, because I felt like China was a really, really important place to learn about climate change and to learn about the environment. So I thought about, okay, how can I get there? What's the way to get me there? And Fulbright really helped me with that. But once I was there, I was doing research, and I felt like it wasn't quite the right fit. So I sort of see it as a chiseling process. Like, you have this piece of wood and you're just making this beautiful piece of art that's going to be your career. And every job you have, at least for me, what worked was to really be thoughtful about writing down, what is it that I love about this job and what is it that doesn't work for me. And so like when I was in research, what I loved was like learning new things and talking to people. What I didn't love was that the projects were really, really long. That didn't work for my the way my brain works and the way that I work most efficiently. So when I was in research, both for Fulbright and for the Environmental Law Fellowship, what I noticed was I really like writing the blogs. I really like talking to people. And so when I thought about that, it's like, okay, I like the subject, but not the process. So I'm going to hone that and go into journalism, which fits more the way that my brain works and the way that I like to work. And, from there, I got into broadcast, because once I was in journalism, I really liked the teamwork. So the individual work I liked also, but I liked the teamwork that needed to be a part of it for me. And now I'm in radio, which is very much about teamwork. So I guess in terms of trajectory, my advice to anyone would be really pay attention to what is working for you and what isn't, because at the end of the day, it's your life and it's your job. So I think a lot of times it can be really intimidating when you're starting out, because you're thinking about what does the employer need from me, but it's also important to think about what do you need from the employer and what do you need from your life, and even more important to that, what are you contributing? What is your passion and skill set, and how are you going to contribute that? And so I think it's tempting if you get really good at something. Like for me, I was really good at like Russian studies. I had, interned at the embassy in Moscow. I had done the critical language fellowship. I've done all these things in Russia. And the Fulbright office looked at me like I was crazy when I went in there saying I was going to apply to China. They said, this doesn't make any sense, because you have everything you need to be competitive in Russia. But for me, I knew that my broader plan was to work in climate change and environment, and you have to trust your own instincts in that way and have a really clear mission statement and let that lead you. And if you need to switch careers, if you need to chisel, if you need to like switch within the job you're in, that's for me, I think that's a really good thing, because now I'm in a place where I really feel like I've hit my stride, and I am doing something that I'm good at, that fits my personal mission, what I want to contribute to the world. And also like, it's not where I started. So and in terms of how my degree helped me, I think, I started as a chemistry major. I think in some fields, it really matters what your degree was. It really is like a straight line. And, if you're like going to be a chemist, you should probably major in chemistry. It's kind of hard to shift. But I think the beautiful thing about social science is that it's just teaching you how to think. And it's just teaching you how to be a good thinker. And you can do whatever you want with the brain and the skills that you've developed in your brain. So I think it's really very, I sort of use what I studied, but I also use a lot of other things. And I feel like it's great because you just have all the options in the world. So I don't think you have to feel limited, but you can always draw on everything that you've learned from your degree.
Thank you so much, Lydia. Evan, what about you?
Yeah, Lydia, I love what you said about having a plan, but writing it in pencil. I can really identify with that because if I can go a little bit further back to the very beginning, I originally came to the university thinking that I would be studying architecture. Just based on where I had gone in high school, I'm like, okay, yeah, I like building relationships and building structures. And that was, I think, one of the topics for my entry essay. And then when I realized that architecture really wasn't the direction that I wanted to go in, and that I actually had a little bit more of a passion for languages than I was letting on, that's what pushed me to look into international studies and a broader, more interdisciplinary approach to the interests that I have. So I really did have to write in a drafting pencil, I guess, and figure things out again from there. So zooming backwards, or forwards rather, to the future, I am where I started. But the skills that have brought me here, I would say, are still fundamentally the same in terms of building sustainable programs, for example. So if we have a product that we are delivering to our students, or a service that we're providing to our students, I can still apply a lot of the passion that I had to design things that work for people, albeit in a more abstract way. And I do still fundamentally get to lean on the capacities that I wanted to develop as an international studies student in diplomacy, broadly speaking. And one of the phrases that keeps coming to mind as I try to think about the way that I connect the work that I do today with what I had studied is that organizational diplomacy seems to fit a little bit the way that I'd at least like to think about what I do. So it's a little bit of a circuitous path. There were a couple of other units that I worked in at the university to get the core skills that I needed to actually apply what I learned to a higher education, international education setting, and in an administrative role too. So that's one thing that I guess that I would offer as advice, is make sure that you have some practical skills coming your way too. But if you're trusting your gut and expanding a little bit more abstractly what you can do, you'll open your options up a lot.
Thanks so much, Evan. Frank, what about you?
Yeah, I really want to echo what both Lydia and Evan said about kind of trusting your instincts and just being open to making change, being open to, you know, if you have an inkling to explore something that you might, you know, as Evan said, you know, really have a passion for more than you're letting on, you know, either to yourself or to others, you know, be sure to check that out and to, you know, kind of follow it to its end, you know, because I don't want to sound pessimistic or anything, but, you know, there comes a point where it's, you know, you're not going to be able to do that anymore. And, you know, it's, you know, it's now's the time to do that. I really had no idea coming out of undergrad what I was going to be doing, you know, and I was a history major. And so I was always kind of changing and adjusting my career plan. You know, it was written in pencil, as Lydia said. And I think, you know, the only kind of common thread was a focus on human rights and international issues. And so I've tried to just be kind of flexible with, you know, the jobs that I look for, and not be too sort of tied down to just not to think dogmatically, and not to think too, not to have too, you know, ironclad idea of who I am and what I do, and to be flexible to trying new things, kind of within the I don't really know where I'm going with this, but I guess basically just kind of keeping an open mind and, you know, following some of those instincts to their logical end is what I would advise.
Awesome. Thank you, Frank. And Emily?
Yes, thank you guys. Your answers pretty much is exactly how I feel as well. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. I wasn't sure about my career path. When I graduated from my undergrad, I did it at Central Michigan in environmental studies. I didn't really know what to do with that. I just knew I cared about the environment. And so I knew, well, if I'm going to do something, I should get a master's. But I also knew once I get a master's, I feel like it's game over in the sense of you can't just kind of go with the wind. You can't try new things out because now, I mean, if you get a scholarship, great, but most people have a nice, chunk of debt that they need to work off. And so I took 5 years off between undergrad and graduate school to explore new things, to see what I like to see. After my undergrad, I worked on an Indian reservation in Idaho doing fire monitoring. And then that changed me into doing wildland firefighting in Florida. And from that experience, I got to learn a lot about fire science. I learned a lot about environmental science, but I also realized this actually isn't the career for me. I'm too social. I want careers where I talk to people, that I need to talk to people. And so from that, I thought maybe I'll try working abroad. So I started teaching English abroad as an experience, to have that experience to go abroad, see what it was like. And sort of all these pieces float together where, I always knew I had an environmental mind, but I didn't know where I was going to go with it. And actually backpacking in Southeast Asia, we ended up in a really tiny village that was just starting community-based ecotourism. And I was so excited I said, can I speak to the project manager? Can I ask some questions? And he said, are you a reporter? And I said, no, I just think this is so interesting. I want to learn about it. And he said, well, if you really want to learn about it, just stay here a couple months. And so that's what I did. I actually ended up stopping my trip and I just stayed in this little village for about 3 months and I learned about community-based ecotourism. So I guess, as the other panelists have said, just listen to the universe, go with what feels right, explore new things, always talk to as many people as possible, because it's going to shape where you go. And so then at that point, I knew I liked environment. I knew I cared about Southeast Asia. And that's what led me to getting the graduate certificate in Southeast Asian studies, because now I have that educational grounding in environmental policy, but I also have the political, social, historical context when I'm working in Southeast Asia to really jump in and get to work when I got there, instead of just like everything is shiny and new and I don't know what's going on. So that's my experience.
Thank you all so much. I thank you for starting us off so strongly and just on such a hopeful note. I think in this time, it's difficult for our grads who are entering the world during a pandemic. And so really appreciate your comments, and also just want to add that I've personally benefited from Evan's building of programs. So thank you, Evan. So turning to this COVID reality that we're living in, we recognize that many students and professionals are feeling tremendous anxiety, both personally and professionally, during the current global pandemic. So I guess I'm wondering, how is your work being affected by the pandemic, and what changes or shifts have you had to make to adapt? Also, maybe what skills have been particularly useful for you in this moment? And finally, what are some ways that job seekers can capitalize on new opportunities in this virtual landscape to gain skills that some of you have mentioned, to add to their resumes, or otherwise take some more proactive steps to get involved in professional development in this moment? So if we can start with Evan, that would be great.
Thank you. I actually am very excited to talk about the ways that the pandemic has changed the way that we do our work, because as you can see, we are on Zoom, and that's not the way that things always used to be. One of the things that I appreciated about working at the International Institute is that we had a collegial open office where we can spend a lot of time talking with each other as we're working through some of the services that we're providing or the projects that we're working on. And it is significantly harder from my perspective to not have that spontaneous, hey, can we check in about this type conversation, which we can do digitally, but it's not the same. So I do want to name that challenge in particular. But I think the question of how job seekers can capitalize on new opportunities is something that came up in a conversation recently with somebody where, although during the pandemic, it's really hard to be present with folks, but the fact that we can access so many resources digitally means that we are thinking a lot more about what our computers can do than what we might have otherwise thought of. So for example, with respect to professional development, for those who are staff at the university, you might know about the Professional Development Office. We would in normal circumstances be commuting to a physical location sometimes to attend certain seminars. Whereas in this current moment, you really just have to click a link depending on the resource. So I think really exploring, if you're affiliated with an institution, assuming that folks are affiliated with U of M, there really are quite a lot of resources. Even pre-pandemic, there were a lot of resources that are available online. I'm not sure if lynda.com is still, one of those sort of like self-teaching tools that are available. But I would really encourage folks to look at what resources exist at the click of your mouse to make that work. And I'm going to promote our office. I work in the academic services unit. I think one of the things that I'm still proud of us or my colleagues at least, for being able to do is to provide one-on-one advising for folks. And I think the fact that those two-way conversations can help people get connected to the resources that they might not otherwise be aware of. I would strongly recommend something that I would recommend during pre-pandemic times anyway. So I hope that provides a little more insight to that question.
Thanks so much, Evan. Emily, can we go to you?
Sure. So I moved back from Bangkok in 2018, and I had a temporary position that I did until 2019. And then I had this really grand plan. I was going to spend some time with my family because I haven't been home in so long. And then I was going to start my new job, whatever that job would be. And so I'm in a career transition as well. So I completely can speak to it because I'm there. I'm with you guys. For me, what's been working really well is just utilizing any context I have. I always press everyone to be as social as possible. Learn about people, meet new people everywhere, in the grocery store, anytime you can get an opportunity to be social, chat with people. So we don't forget how to do it. So when this is over, we're going to still be fresh. And then you never know who you're going to meet when you're out and about. So for me, I've been utilizing my connections. In my current job right now, I'm doing business development for a small startup company, and it's a 100% remote position. And so even though it's not a job that's related to my career, it's actually fulfilling to what my kind of personal goals are right now, because once we're free to travel again, I want to travel all over. I want to work remotely. I'll be a digital nomad. So it fits, my personal lifestyle choices right now, even though it's not completely related to my degree for now, kind of taking a pause. For me, I think the top skill to have right now is being proactive. Networking isn't going to come to you. It's just not, unless you're proactive. And so I think it's really, really important to just keep vigilant, to be looking on LinkedIn for people who have jobs that you're super interested in and just asking them questions about it. I've found a lot of jobs that I thought I really wanted. Once I spoke to the person that was doing that job, I actually didn't really want that job anymore. Like, on the negative side of it, you learn a lot and save yourself a lot of time. So that would be my piece of advice, is to stay motivated and stay proactive and just keep trying to make any type of connections that you can at all times.
Awesome. Could we go to Lydia?
Sure. So I think that, one of the biggest things that I want you all to take home is that I don't actually think networking is that different during COVID. I mean, you don't have the in-person thing, but when it comes down to it, I really think that the most important thing in networking in general is to know what you want. Because I think even if you have all the coffee dates in the world, and you go to all the networking events in the world, if you aren't clear on your own mission, that's not going to come across when you network. So I think the beautiful thing about COVID is that there's kind of a stillness in the world a little bit. You have a little bit more time. I hope you have a little bit less distractions, and that means you can look inward. And that's something that I've always found really useful for my career development, but really hard to find. And even though it is COVID and you might have a little less noise, I still think it's really important to figure out, what is it that helps you think about your mission? For me, it's going on a solo hike, and I schedule solo hikes every once in a while. It doesn't have to be like all the time, but like a couple times a year, when I feel like I need it, I will go on a solo hike with no technology to think about my career and to think about what it is that I really want. And I think you have more opportunities during COVID to do that than you did before. And this is a really crucial thing, especially at the beginning of your career, but it's a crucial thing to do throughout, to keep honing. Even if you already have a job, how are you doing that job? What are you bringing to that job? So for me, it's hikes. Maybe for you, it's listening to music. Maybe it's lying on a beach somewhere. Where do you find that ability to just really think and make sure you bring something to write down when you're in that zone? So, you know, right now, those of you who are listening, take some notes if you want to on this, because this is kind of what I want you to do because it's helped me. So when you figure out where it is that you're going to find your mission statement, which is going to help you network, even in COVID, and especially during COVID, it's important that you're clear on this. You know, the things that you should think about are, what are the issues you really care about? What are the issues you talk about at dinner to your friends? You watch documentaries about them anyways, even though you don't have to. I think there's a really big difference between thinking something is like flashy and fun and cool, and actually at your core wanting to do that. My example is like, when I was a sophomore, I thought the Foreign Service was like so cool. I thought it was so amazing, and I really wanted to be in the Foreign Service. But that was it. I just thought it was cool. And when I went and did an internship in Moscow, I actually was like, I actually don't think this is really me. There's not enough intellectual freedom. And that's not to say that it's not a cool job and it's not flashy. It is, it's just not for me. And I think it takes a lot of time to think about what is for you. So think about, okay, what do you really care about, right? What do you discuss with your friends? What do you read books about, watch documentaries about? Which classes really got you excited or got you angry? Like for me, it's climate change, right? That's the issue I always come back to, that I always think about, that I can never let go because I think it's such a huge deal. So what is that issue for you? Second, what you're going to do is like, what are you really good at? Where are your skills? And even if you don't have those skills yet, what are you excited to become good at and to invest in being good at? For me, it was audio. I wasn't that good at audio at first, but I really liked the process and I really liked investing it. I loved sitting in the studio in my audio class at Columbia and just like staying there for hours and messing with it. And that's how you know, okay, this is something I'm good at or willing to become good at, going to have fun investing in. That's another question you can think about on your hike or your session, or just notice in your life. And then the third thing I would say to write down for you guys to do is, what kind of work environment is important to you? These are people and environments that you're going to be in for hours and hours. And this has become very clear during COVID. The companies that have positive work environments have survived and have people who are still intact. The companies that don't, man, it's rough. So it really is important for you to think about, like, is it important that you are not micromanaged and that you have your own space? Or is it important that you have somebody who really keeps you on track? And that'll help you look for the kind of boss and the kind of environment you want. Now, a caveat to this. This is probably not going to be your first job. It wasn't mine. And I think it's okay to have a dream and to have a really clear idea of what you want and not get there right away. I have worked so many jobs. I can't even explain how many jobs I've worked. I have so many different resumes. You know, I worked in fitness. I worked as a translator using my language skills. I worked as a tutor. I mean, it's just kind of ridiculous how many jobs I've worked. But I think the important thing, and especially now, you know, it's a rough economy, and that's fine. You're going to be fine. You guys are U of M. You're smart. You're ambitious. And you're probably going to have to take jobs that are not your first choice. And what I would say about, unless you have support from somewhere else, and if you do, don't feel guilty about it. Use it to your advantage to contribute your time and your energy to the world in the most positive way. But if you don't, like me, and you need to like support yourself while you're chasing your dream, my advice would be take jobs that you like, but don't get invested in them. Don't lose track of like what you're really after. Because I think once you get in a job and get comfortable and it start to be benefits, it's like so easy to just be like, you know what, I'll just do this. But no, stay focused on your mission statement that you have hammered out during your solo hike or your jam session or whatever, and keep your eye on that prize, because that's like what's going to make you happy and fulfilled and where your energy is going to be best. But keep those other jobs to keep you going. I mean, you might have to work, you know, in whatever you need to get where you need to go. And if you can find jobs that will help you as a stepping stone, that's even better, but don't get attached to them. I know I've been in many situations where these other sort of side jobs that I was doing, I could have very easily turned them into a full-time thing. And I really tried to stay part-time. I tried to still, as much as possible. I mean, you also have to look at the finances, right? So what's the least amount of work you can do in a job that you don't love, to allow yourself the space to keep developing the skills that you need for the job you actually want, if that makes sense. And then the second thing I would say about networking during COVID is you need to figure out what role you are filling. So once you have your mission statement and you know what you want to do, then that's not enough, right? You can't write a cover letter that's just like, these are my dreams. You have to figure out, although that needs to be a part of it, you have to figure out what the employer needs. So I really, I think Emily was saying, like, talk to people who work there. It's so important because like the way that it looks on the outside is almost never how it actually is on the inside. So like whatever you read on their website, it tells you nothing about the job environment. It tells you nothing about what your role would actually be. What are you actually going to be doing? So it's if you in any way can talk to somebody who works there, do that. If you can't do that, sometimes that's really hard. Nobody will answer you. Then make that part of the interview. Ask, you know, like, what's the job environment like? What would I be doing? You know, because if you take nothing else away from anything I've said, like your time is so valuable and life is so short and your career is really important, and what you contribute to the world with your energy, all you smart people out there, is like so crucial. So I would say use COVID to your advantage. Use this time to figure out what it is that you want. And you're not gonna, at least I didn't figure that out like in one sitting. It has been a process that I continue to do to this day. And I think that once you know that, you're gonna be able to network really well. And it doesn't matter if it's at like a networking event or if it's a virtual coffee, the method doesn't matter as much as what you have to say in those conversations.
Thank you so much. And finally, Frank.
Yeah, I've been, since the pandemic, I've been working from home, and so I feel like my my vision of all of this has been a little. I took the new job, and then less than a month after that, all of us were working from home, and so my vision on adjusting to a workplace during COVID is just a little bit skewed. But I've been taking this time since April 2020 to do some things professionally that I typically don't have the time or the energy to do when I'm commuting back and forth between a workplace, and that's just to try to make sure that I've kept up connections to people that I admire or have friendships with or are close to from previous jobs. That those are relationships that I think I'd be especially hard pressed to keep up otherwise, that might even fall by the wayside if I wasn't taking the time to do that. And so in a sense, COVID has, I don't want to say it's been an advantage, anything but it's given me some opportunities to do things that I just typically either don't have the energy to do or that I forget to do. And so I would advise everyone to, if you can think of any such advantages in your own professional life or personal life, to now is to think of anything like that you might not otherwise have the time or the energy to do. And also I've been, I think it's so important to challenge yourself to talk to a range of people in your life, when you're thinking about your job and your next step, or your first step or what have you, just to make sure that you're not getting, kind of a singular vision or you know, it's, I don't know, I make sure to, just for my own part, I make sure to talk to, you know, a real variety of friends, family, but then, you know, professional connections too, who have a totally different vision from my partner or from my sister, or, you know, it's just having a diversity of voices that you can reach out to, I think is really crucial when you need advice about your professional, your next step, or what have you. So I think those are my 2 cents right now.
Thank you, Frank.
Yeah.
You all have such wonderful advice. It's so nice to hear. Thank you. So for our last general question for everybody, I want to ask about obstacles you've faced in addition to the global pandemic. So what's one major obstacle, either in your personal life or in your professional field, that you've had to overcome in order to achieve the professional success that you have today? And how did you handle this obstacle, and how has it shaped your career and outlook on your career? So first, if I could turn it back to you, Frank.
Sure. I mean, I think I can point to two, you know, one personal and one practical challenge. You know, on the personal end of things, I remember being so just personally, you know, from my first year of Michigan to, you know, my first, you know, year or so in my first job out of grad school, I just remember being a little bit, maybe starstruck isn't the right word, but a little bit intimidated by and envious of some of the other people that I shared the room with. You know, they seemed to really have their stuff together. They, you know, they knew they'd had all these really wild and wonderful experiences, and knew so many. You know, it took a little while to really feel like I belonged in the room with them, which was kind of, you know, maybe that's, you know, I think some people experience that more than others, but it just took a little bit of doing. So, and then, you know, just on a more practical level, you know, I think it's, and well, maybe it's a personal level too, but I tended to just get kind of locked into what I'd previously done, and I, you know, I had a sense of who I was and what I was interested in, and that kind of, I think that can work against you if you're a little bit too rigid like that. And I think we talked a little bit about that earlier, but just being open to experiences or possibilities that you hadn't really entertained before, and following your instincts with regard to that. And if there's something that you really are, you know, curious to explore, you know, there's often kind of more roundabout ways to, you know, aside from, you know, networking, of getting involved and getting to know, I forget, was it Lydia or Emily who talked about informational interviews can be a really useful resource, or stopping your hike in the middle of Southeast Asia to get to know environmental tourism outfit, or, you know, just volunteering. You know, in my case, it was volunteering. It was, you know, I knew I wanted to be involved in human rights and in refugee and immigrant issues in the Twin Cities. But, you know, my background at Michigan had to do with Russian and East European studies. And at least at this point, there aren't a whole lot of immigrants and refugees coming from the former Soviet Union in the Twin Cities metro. And so I wanted to learn more about, you know, the folks who were, you know, about the newer populations and communities that were coming to the Twin Cities, mostly from Southeast Asia and East Africa. And so I got involved with the Center for Victims of Torture, and, you know, doing a full range of volunteering with them, from doing, you know, one-on-one English tutoring to a variety of writing projects for them. And that really, you know, aside from just being a good networking, you know, it was, you know, and aside from being, you know, really just personally and intellectually fulfilling, you know, it really, that process gave me a really good sense of what I wanted to be doing here in the Twin Cities and what kind of other possibilities were out there and where I should be looking. And so I guess I think my biggest takeaway here is just to, I promote, I suggest, volunteering is such a great way to get involved and to develop your professional skills and contribute to some of the issues that you care about most. So.
Thank you. Let's go to Lydia next.
Sure. So I think for me, the biggest obstacle that I've had is I have a chronic illness. And so I'm like out some of the time. And this is something I've struggled with even through my time at U of M. So some of you might not have things that you struggle with, but I think there are probably many of you who do. Either it's something physical, mental health problem, other stuff. We're all humans and we have these things that are outside of our work lives that impact our lives. And I just want to talk directly to people who are struggling to say that, like, if you have a mission and a clear vision of what you want to do, then that doesn't need to hold you back. And you are valuable and you have something to contribute, and you are deserving of a good job that fulfills you and uses your skills just as anyone else. And I think it took me a long time to sort of realize that, because I think sometimes when you're struggling with something, you're like, oh, I don't know if I can be a good employee. You can, you just need to find the job that fits your needs. And I'll give you an example. It took me 6 years to graduate at U of M, but nobody needs to know that I struggled. I guess now that they will, since this will be on YouTube, but you know what I mean? Like, people, it doesn't matter how you get there. It just matters that you're happy with where you end up. And so even if you have these obstacles, things might take a little bit longer. You might have to go a completely different path than everybody else. That's fine. Like, just do your different path, and just be happy with where you're going. And if you need to take days off, and if you're slower at things, I think at the end of the day, it's harder, but it's okay if you are still on the path that you want to be on. I think I would rather be on a path that I'm happy to be on and be like walking it more slowly than on a path that I don't want to be on and like racing ahead, because then you end up in like 5 or 10 years at some full-time job where you're like, what am I doing in the world? Like, why am I here? So I think, I'm just here to say, like, I support you, and you can do it if you're struggling with anything, because I'm really happy with where I am now. And it wasn't necessarily like the easiest or straightest path. I like almost failed stats or something in my last semester and almost didn't graduate because I was just like struggling so much physically. But I got my degree, and like, here I am. And like I said, nobody really needs to know how you got there. And I also think it's really, really important to figure out like what kind of life works for you, for the person that you are. Like, maybe it's not that you're struggling with something like me, but maybe it's just that like your social life is really important to you. So maybe you don't need to have a job that like forces you to work really long hours. And that's like a really important part of this too. It's not just about your work and what you're contributing. It's also about like what kind of life you want. And you are the engineer of that. And maybe that's an obstacle. Maybe like not wanting to work 1 million hours is an obstacle, and that's fine. Like that's a great obstacle, because at the end of the day, it's a whole package. It's not just your career. It's also like, how do you fit in the other things that really, really matter to you? Or how do you fit in being able to take care of yourself? And just as like a concrete example, like I'm freelance because that gives me a lot more freedom, and a lot more ability to like navigate when I'm having rougher days, and I still produce really good work that I'm really proud of. And I'm like in a situation where I can do that. But yeah, just that I think like I've said, I feel like I'm starting to sound repetitive, but because I really care about this point, if you have your mission clear and if you continue to focus on that mission, even if you're like really struggling, even if you're like out for like a month, it's just like a pause on your overall path. So yeah.
Thanks, Lydia, and thanks for sharing your experience. Emily, could we go to you next?
Sure. Yeah, Frank and Lydia, that was really awesome. Thank you for sharing, both of you. I guess I'll speak of a different struggle. Professionally, I would say a big struggle is working in Southeast Asia. Just the level of corruption and extreme poverty is something that really, you think you're ready and then you get there and it's not, it's crushing. So that would be like my professional obstacle, but something that's a little bit more relevant for those that are newer in their career. When I first started out, when I first kind of dawned on me that I'm a curious person, I want to travel, I want a job that I want to see new places, I want to meet new people. My family did not support me. They thought I was crazy. They just want me to be home. They want me to get a job as a teacher. You'll have summers off. You can travel. Like, why are you doing this? Why are you going into so much debt? Like they really questioned everything that I was believing in. And so that was my biggest obstacle was my family. And so my advice is just prepping your family. For those of you that are looking to live abroad or have a career or global career where you're traveling, start prepping your family now, and start prepping them by letting them know how much you love them and how much you care about them. And it's not that you don't like your home, it's that you want to experience different things, because people in my family almost took it personally. Like, why do you have to go to Korea and teach English? You can teach English here. Why are you going somewhere else? Just really kind of start putting the pieces in place that this is what I want to do, and this is what I'm going to do. And it doesn't mean I don't love you. It means I'm just going to love you differently from far away. So I guess that could be my biggest obstacle, was getting my family on board. And now that I moved to Korea in 2007, and I've been traveling, I'm living in various places ever since. They are finally on board. They get it. So I can say, just stick with it and they'll get it. And that's my advice for obstacle. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Emily. And Evan, what about you?
Yeah, Emily, I was going to go in a slightly different direction with my own particular obstacles, but I really can relate to the family side of things. When I studied abroad in Germany for just a month, it was such a huge deal leading up to it. It's like, I'm not disappearing forever, y'all. I'm going to be back. So I can definitely echo that sentiment too. But Frank, I want to echo also something that you said about belonging in the room. I think we've probably all heard read some LinkedIn article about imposter syndrome. And I don't want to be too trite, but in all honesty, that has been an enduring challenge for me. I'm not sure if others have had that recurring dream where as a student, you show up in a class for the first time halfway through the semester and haven't done anything. And I'm not going to say that has happened as I think about, work projects where it's like, did I do anything for this yet? And it's 7 months in. But that's a real obstacle when I think about, the day-to-day of really knowing that the skills that you have acquired do have a way of being applied. I think especially, as I think a lot of us have said, if you have to shapeshift and forge your own path a little bit in order to secure employment in an economy that's kind of hostile to interdisciplinarity in some ways, it can be really tough to feel the confidence that the road you walk on is stable. And that's valid. And I think knowing the value of your contributions above and beyond the sort of approval feedback loop that you might otherwise be depending on in a workplace has been my antidote to that. It's just knowing what my story is and being able to tell it in a coherent, compelling way, and being able to develop as its own skill set, a way of saying, I, as an individual, have acquired this skill set that others who've taken a similar path wouldn't have. How do I bring my unique contributions, even if they don't seem like they make sense, to the fore so that they can, improve, add value, I think is maybe the more business oriented way of saying that. But being in touch with your value, I think is the most concise antidote that I can provide to the obstacle of imposter syndrome.
Thank you so much, Evan, and thank you all so much. I feel like I'm gonna keep this recording and go back to it later when I'm feeling less confident about my abilities. This has been really great so far. So we're gonna move on to some individual questions for the panelists. And I'd like to start with Emily, if that's all right. because you have experience working in Bangkok for both the nonprofit and the private sector, which I think is something a lot of our students think about, you know, like which sector do I want to go into? What are the differences? So I'm wondering if you can talk about some of the differences between working for a nonprofit versus a for-profit business. What was rewarding and what was difficult about both experiences? And what you've talked about this already a bit, but if you could delve into a little more about what the process of beginning to work abroad looks like, and what advice you have for those wanting to do that as you did.
Yeah, awesome. Actually, it segues from my advice of having a family. I mean, no offense to my family, but a family that wasn't completely on board with where I wanted my career to go. I meant to also mention, don't just sit on that. Seek out people that will give you that guidance. Seek out people that will give you that. And if you're just starting out in your career, I can understand if you're listening right now and you're like, what connections do I have? I'm going to school. Like, who am I talking to? Your professors are like the absolute gem of networking and connections right now, and so much information. And I feel like when I was in my undergrad, I didn't realize that, and I didn't utilize it as well as I could have. And so once I realized the power of just talking with your professors and learning from them, I chatted with every single one of my professors so much. And that is segue to this question, how I ended up in Bangkok. So I would go bug my professor all the time. I just, you know, I'm really curious about his research. I want to know what he's doing. And so then he ended up hiring me to work at his International Forestry Research Institute, doing research and administrative assistant work. And so I was editing an MOU, a memorandum of understanding that was coming in, and they were looking to join this international research program, and they are based in Bangkok. And so I wrote them back and I said, if you're looking, you know, to get some help on this, like, I'm for hire. I just graduated. I just want to let you know that I'm here. And they gave me an interview and I got the job. And that's how I moved to Bangkok, was just from piece by piece making those connections. Because I did feel, I mean, when I was doing my graduate degree, I was looking for an internship, and I applied so many places. Like, I wanted to have an international internship, and a lot of them are unpaid, and I didn't have any money. And so the ones I got, I couldn't afford to do, and I didn't get offered any that paid. So I did feel really stuck, and really networking and chatting with my professors was the key. Okay, so now flip side, when I'm in Bangkok, starting out in the nonprofit sector was extremely rewarding, because there's one bottom line. We're working to help local people that don't have the rights to their own land. It was very cut and dry. You know what you're doing, everyone's on the same mission, and you're working with people that truly have the same passion as you do. So that was amazing. But the negative of it is that it's not private sector. There's no money just coming in. So we did have to spend a lot of our time working on proposals, and that's extremely stressful, because you're taking away from your work that you want to be doing, because you're looking for funding to get the work that you want to be doing. So I hope that makes sense of a kind of pro and con of working in nonprofit. And so then when I thought, well, I'm going to try private sector world, and I bet it'll be so much better because they have money. I'm working for a luxury tourism company. This is amazing. But my eyes were really opened when I learned about a double bottom line, that, you know, their philanthropy work can be maybe not because they want to help people, but because they want to market it and they want to show others how much they're helping others. So that was also something that was a challenge in working for-profit versus nonprofit world. I hope that is a clear answer, kind of gives a little pro and con of both.
Yeah, that's incredibly helpful. Thank you so much, and for being willing to share some of your experiences. I'd like to ask Frank a question next, because I think a lot of our students are getting, you know, I mean, for Sam and I, we're both getting master's degrees in international studies in various area study centers. A lot of our undergrad folks, like Evan, did international studies. And so Frank, since getting your master's degree in the Center for Russian, East European, and Eurasian Studies, you've gone on to work with people from all over the world, including at the Center for Victims of Torture, which you mentioned, which serves survivors from places like Burma, Ethiopia, South Sudan, Iraq, and Syria, among many others. Could you talk a bit about how your area studies degree has translated into your current work? And how does an area studies degree, maybe regardless of the region of focus, hold value for working on international issues and with populations of diverse national origins?
Sure. Yeah, I think originally I envisioned myself working abroad, and so but for a whole variety of reasons, I ended up staying here in the U.S. And as I said earlier, I think the kind of the common thread has been just a focus on human rights and immigration issues, and so at the organizations that I've worked with in the Twin Cities that serve immigrant and refugee populations here, I think there's not really such a clear cut, on paper, it's not such a clear cut connection between my master's degree in Russian, East European, and Eurasian studies. And so you kind of have to dig a little bit deeper I have to dig a little bit deeper to really understand how I'm bringing those skills into my work every day. But I am, and it's, just aside from like the really obvious ways, like it's really, my time at Michigan, my time in Greece was such a boon for my writing skills. But just in terms of my perspective too, I think I bring a unique perspective to the organizations I've worked for here in the Twin Cities, which, a lot of I think a lot of them are very domestically focused, and that's a good thing. But I think I'm often one of the people with kind of a unique idea of some of the politics and the of what's driving the refugee populations from their from their countries in the first place. Aside from that, I think the area studies programs, I think Evan said something earlier about imposter syndrome, and it can be difficult to, especially when you're comparing yourself to people who've been sort of singularly focused. You've kind of drawn a little bit from a lot of different programs, a lot of different fields. It can be kind of difficult to think that, well, I have much of a sense of any one of them, but I think that can be such a benefit too. That's having a little bit of a background in the literature of a region, in the languages of a region, and in the politics and the history, in the culture of a region can really be such a benefit to the way that you think and your awareness of the possibilities there, for you professionally. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Frank.
Yeah.
Evan, I have a question for you. A lot of area studies students are interested in higher education and international education, but it can be difficult to know exactly what that looks like. So I'm wondering if you can give some examples of what non-faculty opportunities might look like based on your experience, and how an internationally minded student might be able to apply their language studies and area studies knowledge in a variety of roles in education administration.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite things to talk about, actually. And I guess I'm just going to borrow from folks up here too, because Lydia, I think I remember hearing you saying something about it being ridiculous, the amount of resumes that you've had. And I unfortunately can share that claim, or fortunately. I also minored in translation studies, so I'll metaphorically segue by saying that I translated some of the skills that I learned in the disciplines that I acquired my educational qualifications in. And The leap that I took into international education actually came through, more broadly speaking, higher education / student support. I worked as a peer mentor while I was a student, and then worked a little bit for the program after I had graduated to do some of their promotion and leaning on some of the media production classes that I had taken. So I pivoted from there into a similar role, which involved an app development, like project management piece, just sort of falling into my lap. So this is definitely not a path that I prescribe for anyone, but I think the point that I mean to illustrate is that when you're learning in the disciplines that you're in, and again, as we had spoken to a couple times before, figuring out the master key-ish ways that you can apply some of your skills allows you to find the niches, if you're looking to be in higher education, the niches of higher education where you can apply your skills. So again, the relationship building piece for me, a little bit of product design, that's a more specific discipline, but borrowing the skills that I can in order to make that work allows you to occupy really a broad range of positions. I think if you're looking for titles in particular, in addition to the faculty that you're probably getting some academic advice from, if you were looking, for example, at events like this that are being put on, that takes staff time. It takes staff time for the in-person events to secure the refreshments even. The logistics of facilitating higher education experiences and international education experiences, especially if we're talking about coordinating internships too, that also relies on you having connections across borders. And yeah, I can name drop colleagues, but I don't want to be too indecorous with that. So I guess I would just point everybody's attention to the folks that you may not be noticing as much, who are working just alongside the faculty, making a lot of these enriching experiences happen in the first place. So yeah, look at those positions and think about how you might fit in those positions too with some of the skills that you have.
Thanks so much, Evan. And Lydia, I wonder if you can talk a little bit more about how your experience abroad has informed your work as a journalist in the US. For example, I imagine it would be extremely valuable to have your international experience when you're reporting on climate change, which you've mentioned being passionate about.
Yeah, I think for me, languages and international studies, that kind of thing. I was talking before about like figure out what your mission is versus what just like are your interests. And I had a hard time for a long time discerning between those two, like the international / language diplomacy path versus the climate change path. But so I spent a lot of time abroad because I was figuring that out. But once I got back and started working in journalism, I think that working internationally is so great for developing an ability to connect with all kinds of people that are really different from you and seeing things from different perspectives, because you are forced to do that internationally. And as a journalist, that's like a super key skill, because you have to write about issues and you have to talk with people who you maybe personally don't agree with, but you need to do a fair job representing and figuring out their perspective and connecting with them as a human being. Those are all things that I learned abroad. And just in terms of the subject matter, taking a step away from like the personal connection and understanding people, it's really helpful to contextualize any domestic story in an international sense, because the US, everything we do, or most things we do, have some kind of ripple effect abroad. And to me, it's not just like, okay, this is going to like affect XYZ country. If it's somewhere that I've been and where I have friends, like the way that I think about it is so different because I have a personal stake in it. And as much as we might, want to be really empathetic and really have investment in places, if you've been there, those of you who've been abroad, it completely changes the equation, because you think about it as like a little bit as your home too. Even if it's not entirely your home, you think about it as like a real actual place, rather than a place that you have read about or like even traveled to for like fun. If you've lived there and you have been embedded in that culture, you think about it really differently. I think that the biggest example of that for me personally is China, because my experience at U of M had been so limited with just, the study abroad students from China who are a very specific type of person from China, as are the people from the US who go abroad, right? It's a very specific type of person. So, I lived there for like 3 years and really got to understand it a lot more. And in terms of writing about US climate change, what's happening here, it really, really helps me to understand the context. I just did a story last week on Bitcoin. Bitcoin is like mainly mined in China. So that really helped me, even though it was a New York-based story connected to a mayoral candidate, it still had these international parts of it that I feel like I understand better, and I have to work a little bit less hard to understand them and to contextualize them. I also feel like I understand how US media is perceived abroad. That's a huge thing. Like that's a huge, huge thing when you're writing about anything that touches anything international. If you haven't spent time there, you might not take into consideration how that could come across and what kind of damage or help that could be in terms of the diplomacy there. Not that that's like necessarily the job of journalism, but in some ways I do think it's important that US journalists are really cognizant of how they are representing people in their writing.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lydia, and thank you to all the panelists for those just really insightful and hopeful answers. So now I'm going to hand it over to Alana to ask some of our audience Q&A questions. As you can see in the chat, please continue to submit Q&A questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. If you could include your name and affiliation, and if your question's for a specific panelist, please address it to them. Or feel free to ask general questions. Much.
Thank you, Katherine, and thank you, Sam. My name is Alana, and I'm the program manager for the Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies. And I'll be jumping in now to moderate the audience Q&A. So first, I just want to say thank you to our panelists for your incredibly real and relatable and inspiring comments. I just think that all of us, regardless of our current professional status, really benefit so much from reminders that we're all on the right path, even if the path seems to be taking us on a detour from what we had planned, that there are skills to be learned and important experiences to be had sort of at every stop along the way of our career journeys. So I like to think of it as a journey instead of, various destinations. So yeah, it's really helpful to remind myself that those things that we perceive to be as personal or professional setbacks also add value. And even though, it might not be clear at the time. So you had wonderful insight. Thank you. So I am going to take moderator privilege to ask the first question. Sorry, not sorry. My question is directed towards Evan, because I do work with him at the International Institute. And what the audience might not know is that you are the chair of the Inclusive Culture Liaisons Committee. And that's an internal volunteer-based committee, and it's focused on creating a diverse, equitable, and inclusive climate. And since I serve on the committee, I can say that you're an incredible leader for us and that the innovative programming that you do has been positively recognized campus-wide. So my question is, how have your internationally focused experiences and international career ambitions sort of enhanced your ability to do this very important but challenging DEI work?
Well, first of all, Alana, thank you very, very much for those kind words and shining that spotlight. It is a bright light, and I'm sweating a little bit, but I think the thing that I can share is that for international studies in particular, and for the concentration that I was in, which was norm security and cooperation, part of the ambition that I had was to be involved in diplomacy, and specifically to have a role in statecraft. Pardon the outside noise, if you can hear it, is to be involved in statecraft for the purpose, broadly speaking, of peacemaking. I think is what guided that ambition for me. So that's been the enduring ambition, to work with others to positively shape people's lives, and even all the way back to the architecture time in my life, whether it was to build sustainable buildings or, in the diplomacy portion, imagine myself building peace agreements or more broadly, just, you know, as a peer mentor, building supportive relationships with students, I figured out that if others share the same goal as me to have a peaceful and well-organized world, we need to start with collaborative and well-organized communities. And I think that's the essence of really what I wanted to do in my career, actually. Even though it doesn't necessarily have to be at the national level, even at the organizational level, I think especially in an international institute where we might be training people, where we as staff are explicitly and implicitly with our actions impressing upon folks that we work with, you know, I think our ICL committee helps us to create a culture where collaboration, inclusivity in particular, just to cite what's in the name, and more broadly, yeah, just a comfortable, happy world is where that comes from. So, you know, I hope that's not repeating the same message, but it really does kind of come back to the same vein of wanting to see, yeah, wanting to see peaceful collaboration moving forward, if that makes sense.
It does. Thank you. Thank you for the work you do and for, for supporting us all to do better work in this way. I'm going to ask a question from Imara Dawson from the International Institute. He asked, what was the most important or relevant course that you took in college or in university that impacts your current career? And anyone can jump in. Yeah, Emily.
Sorry, I don't know how to do it. I took two courses that were extremely useful. One, it was negotiations, conflict management and negotiations. May think that's not related to environmental issues, but it applies to everything. And I've been able to use the skills that I learned from my conflict management and negotiations class in literally every aspect of my life. It was the best course I ever took. There was another course at the School of Public Policy at the Ford School that was just nonprofit management. So when you kind of break out of your core and like go to the other areas and take different courses, that really is what stuck with me, because it was something so different that it's skills that I'll use forever in all different aspects of my life. So those two courses. Thank you.
Thank you. If anyone else would like to jump in, just go ahead and unmute yourself. Lydia.
Sure. I would say so. I switched to the Ford School my junior year. And the first class I took there with John Torchiari was just like Public Policy 101 or something, or 301, whatever it was, the basic one, was so useful. Oh my goodness. I still think about it all the time because we learned about the different stakeholders. And I think even if I weren't a journalist, just as a citizen, to understand like the different pressure systems in our country and like how they affect our lives and who's pulling what levers, so great. But I think for me in general, it was just actually making that switch to the Ford School really, really helped me in my job today, because I was, I was just on a slightly different track before that. It was chemistry and poli-sci or something. I don't know, but the Ford School was like such a wonderful resource for me and has been so helpful for me. So anybody who's interested in the Ford School can, feel free to get in touch with me later. But yeah, but how I got there is I basically went to like all the I made like a huge list of all the departments I was interested in, possibly majoring in. And I went to like all their different departments and I just interviewed them. I should have probably known then that journalism was the right fit for me, but I went to like all the different departments and I just asked them like, what do you do at this department? What are your best classes? Why? What do your students do as a job? Do you like your job? So I feel like it's not necessarily a bad thing either to like treat your courses also as a little bit of an interview process. Like, is this because you only have so many and they're all so great and you only have so much time. And so I think it's really good to like try out different departments and see what is a good fit for you for your learning.
Thank you. Frank or Evan, it's okay to pass.
Yeah, I think one of the other advantages of the situation that we're in, where we're all digital, is that I can look at C2, or at least what I saved from C2s. And I think one of the classes that I would cite as I'm looking at the syllabus pulled up right now is political psychology. I'm not sure if that's actually offered or how often that's offered now at U of M, but it really did help me to understand the connection between the ways that people think and how, and broadly speaking, in political circumstances, how that influences them to act. And although that has more to do with maybe like domestic leadership or leadership as a function at national or supranational levels, I think a bad habit of mine that I refuse to let go of is that I think a lot of the things that we study about nation states and their motivations, their interests, what compels them, are applicable to how we can understand each other at an individual level. And that political psychology helped to build that bridge for me, you know, not that we are all a country unto ourselves, you know, with militaries necessarily, but I think being able to understand people, yeah, along a different dimension was really helpful from that class. And I do that every day.
Thank you. Let's see. Okay, Frank, no.
And I just wanted to jump in and say one more really quick thing that I forgot to say, which is that, yes, it's good to take classes that are useful for your career, but like everything that I've do in my job, I sort of learned on the job. And I just remember this German lit class that I took that blew my mind. And I'm never going, like, I would never right now have the chance to do that. So don't underestimate the classes that are really interesting to you that have nothing to do with your career. Like that's part of the fun of, that was part of the fun of college for me. And that those are the things that stand out to me that I no longer have the chance to do. So yeah, just putting that as a caveat to not always be career focused to an extent, but allow that wiggle room for stuff that's really fun and really interesting. Those are some of my most memorable moments.
Thank you, Frank.
Yeah, to that point, Lydia, I mean, I still have, you know, I took a history of philosophy class, you know, it was just kind of, you know, and it has absolutely nothing to do with what I do now or with even what I planned to do, but it was one of those things that, you know, you could only ever learn about while you're at university like that. And, you know, I still have all of the textbooks from it that I just pick up every now and again. And, you know, you can, you know, read through all kinds of things like Benedict Anderson and Friedrich Nietzsche and whatnot that would just otherwise not have anything to do with your day-to-day life. But it sticks with you in ways that you might not expect, I think.
Thank you all so much. Okay, so I have a question from Jessica Hill-Riggs, Southeast Asian Studies Master of Public Policy alumna from 2015. She says, thank you all for sharing your perspectives and wisdom, and shouts out Emily and Frank. I guess you were all classmates. She asked, could you share what skills that you learned on the job that then became really helpful for your career? Or rather, taking stock of where you are now, what skills would have been helpful to learn in undergrad or grad school? And she's thinking about things like project management, grant writing, or even interpersonal communication skills. So I'll let anyone who wants to unmute jump in.
I can answer. Oh, go ahead, Lydia.
Lydia.
You go.
Okay, for me, for the job that I got straight out of college, out of university, from my connections I made at my job at U of M, it was implementing this research program, but the actual job title was a monitoring and evaluation officer. And so I'm a social person. I'm not really interested in data. I didn't really understand it, but actually the skills I learned from that job of being meticulous in planning and thinking about end goal first, and then working backwards and really systematizing how I think. Those were skills that I'm using in every job I've had from here on out, and are actually very marketable. When I tell people that I was a monitoring and evaluation officer, it automatically tells them that I think systematically. And so I think even like Udemy would have small courses on like monitoring and evaluation, but yes, project management as a larger thing of learning how to think systematically when you're planning is a really great skill that I learned on the job that I wish I had just a little bit more of prep before going into my career.
Thank you. We'll go to Lydia now.
I would just say that my experience has been that you probably already have a lot of the skills that you need, or you will develop them quickly on the job. But to me, the more important skill, weirdly, was actually to figure out how to focus, to figure out how to like maximize my brain for learning new skills, because every job I've been in had skills that I didn't have before, that I probably could have never learned before, actually, because they're so specific to that job. But you're so much better at learning skills if you maximize your brain. So like invest in skills that are really basic, like invest in maximizing your sleep. Like I took a whole masterclass on sleep, because like that is going to impact how you learn new skills probably more than anything else, or any other skill that you had before. Figure out what are the things that you do with your time outside the job that are going to help you within your job, or like what is your focus like? Like nowadays it's so hard to focus because there's so many distractions. So like what works for you? Is it getting into a zone and doing big chunks of work for a long time, or is it those like 25-minute, 5-minute break things? What maximizes your brain to learn new skills? That is a skill in and of itself, knowing how you work best. And it's something that actually requires a lot of investment. You can't just like, read a quick HuffPost article about it. You have to like really investigate the science behind it, try out different things. If you get yourself to a point where you can focus easily, where you don't get really stressed out, where you feel like you have your sleep, your food, and your exercise hacked in a way that your brain is maximized, then you're going to pick up new skills. Like they're just going to be like falling off you. But if you're in a place where you're really stressed, you're really tired, it doesn't matter what skills you have, you won't be able to implement them well. You won't be good at taking feedback if you're not emotionally stable. Feedback is a really, really important way to learn new skills. Asking for feedback from your bosses is like the #1 way that I've learned new skills. Like, hey, what could I do better? And don't be afraid of what they're going to say, because I'd rather have them say it to me than think it and not say it, and I keep doing things that are not working. So yeah, invest in hacking your brain.
Thank you. I love that advice. I'm going to implement that into my life. Franklin, Evan, did you have anything you'd like to add?
I think I'll go really quickly. I think the question in particular about grant writing, I think if we were to expand upon that and have maybe more of an elaborated curriculum around a lot of other skills that would be useful in nonprofit organizational contexts, I think that's something that I've learned a little bit on the fly. I know that U of M as a higher education institution is a little bit different, from what most other nonprofits would be, but there are some similarities that I think it would be helpful to have had some advanced prep with, at grant writing being one of them. But also I think research as it pertains to, for example, like the data collection that we might have to do. Yeah, and if we have to do an understanding of the communities that we serve, including our students, what skills will we need to know in order to make sure that we're interfacing with those folks adequately? So thumbs up to grant writing.
Yeah, I would say that too, and grant writing, but then also just understanding some of the more nitty-gritty technical elements of how nonprofits work, or NGOs abroad, like budgets, for instance, was something that how budgets work is something that I've had to learn on the fly, and that I'm still, it's not my bread and butter. I'm not a numbers person, and so I'm still learning it on the fly. But I think having a head start coming out of grad school would have been helpful. I think finding a way to take advantage of all of those courses and fields that are available to you while you're at an institution like Michigan. I think striking a balance between what your focus is and what you're dedicated to, but then also making sure that you're able to kind of smartly pick and choose courses that might not be so connected to your academic study, but that can give you some skills that you might have a sense that you would be using down the line, that can kind of help fill in some of your blind spots or some of your skills gaps that you're aware of. If you know that well, I'm a hell of a writer, you know, and I love studying, you know, if you're really is it right brain or left brain? If you're, you know, a words and books person, but you know, you don't know much about, you know, how budgets work or how, you know, something like that, taking a course on that can really, I think, be really helpful. And that's something I wish I would have known, because I've had to learn a lot of that stuff on the fly. So.
Thank you all so much. So we have a question here from an incoming MIRS student. So first of all, welcome and congratulations. We look forward to meeting you, hopefully in person in the fall. And so the student is wondering if graduates from this program find success in going into academia. Are any graduates admitted into PhD programs, you know, from area studies programs? And so I can just say that yes, many students from area studies programs go into PhD programs and then on into academic positions at universities, both domestically and internationally. It's quite a few. But this panel, we always sort of organize it with a different intent, but we look forward to you joining us on campus and then connecting you to students who are taking that path. But I did just want to reframe the question a little bit for purposes of our panel and see if any of our panelists maybe had early ambitions to go on to a PhD program or go on into academic positions in universities. Did something change your mind? Perhaps I can just say, you know, anytime you're in a master's program, you'll be asked if you're going on to a PhD, so it's not something that we ignore. So I just wondered what your experience was with that. And if you might have done anything differently during your program, if you were going to have academic ambitions rather than going out into the professional world, non-academic roles. Feel free to unmute.
I've always been interested in doing a PhD, just getting into academia in general. My teaching experience, I used to teach English in Korea and Turkey. So I know in my heart, I love education. I love teaching. It's just who I am. But after I did my master's, I really wanted to just get out into the workforce. It just isn't in the cards right now of wanting to, you know, focus on research and teaching, but it is something that's in the back of my mind that I could definitely see myself pursuing later on. So it is on the back burner. I just have too much energy right now that I want to put into other places. So that's my experience.
I love that. Never say never.
I think for me, I mean, I didn't do a PhD, but I went to grad school. For me, it was very important to have a reason to go to grad school and to not just do it as like something to do to stall working. So I kind of went into the workforce and I worked until I felt like, okay, now I am like, I have a reason to go to grad school. And that's something that I really want to learn. And I think coming back to school with work experience helped make my graduate degree more useful. That being said, if you're like really set on going into academia, there's nothing wrong with going straight into a PhD. If you know that's what you want to do and that's the best use of your time, then like go for it. But I would say, you know, if even part of you is not sure, PhD is a big deal. I have a lot of friends who do PhDs. You're like studying one subject for a bunch of time, a huge hunk of your life. So I think it's just really good to be sure that's what you want to do, because I've seen people get into PhD programs who didn't really want to be there. And it's like, it looks like torture if you don't want to be there. It looks amazing if you do want to be there. Like it's great, right? If that's like really what you want to do and you want to go into academia and you're studying something you're really, really passionate about, it's like a super great deal. But if you're not, then you're kind of stuck for a long time. So just think about whether it makes sense before.
Thank you. If that's it for that question, I do have one more just to close out because we're approaching an hour and a half here. What are some, this was a question that was submitted beforehand. What are some of the common misconceptions about being successful in today's professional climate or being successful in your field in particular? Any common misconceptions that you come across? I'd like to share with our audience. feel free to unmute. Evan.
I can start by saying that one of the common misconceptions is that success is a destination, or that I was going to say is that it exists.
Yes.
But it is certainly possible to be successful. But I think one of the things that I've learned through my own experience of wrestling with, imposter syndrome and a sense of belonging is that, yeah, it's a little bit corny, but it is true that it's about the journey and not the destination. So, and I may also cite another platitude, perfection is not the goal, growth is. So I think focusing on that has been affirming and reassuring for me. Yeah, that's the main thing that comes to mind.
I think one misperception is that like you have to be like really assertive and really ambitious all the time. And that is a good thing. It is good to be persistent and ambitious and assertive. And I have been all those things and it's helped me a lot. But you can't only be that, I don't think, to be successful. You also, and you can't be that if it gets in the way of you being a good, decent, kind coworker, which I think sometimes it can. You need to be nice to work with because nobody wants to work with somebody that's just like really assertive and ambitious at the expense of others. That's like not fun for you and it's not fun for anybody else. And I think that at the end of the day, people want to hire people that they could see themselves working with. And I think that's something we maybe don't think about all the time. But think about if you were hiring somebody, you would want to hire somebody that's like pleasant to work with. And so you don't always have to be like the loudest and person who cuts people off, like in order to show that you're ambitious. You can be ambitious in your own way. And I think if you do the work and you are, good at taking feedback and you help other people out, even when nobody sees that you're helping them out. And if you just focus on like being a good human being, that will get you very, very far. And you can just be confident in the work that you do. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't, advocate for yourself and you shouldn't like make sure that people know the good work you're doing. One thing that I have always done at every job is I like keep a list of the things that I'm proud of and that other people have been proud of me for doing. So if I do a really good story, if I do, a really good project, I keep a list of that and I write it down because at the end of the job, you're going to forget like the times when your boss was like, oh my gosh, this is a great job. And more importantly, they're going to forget. And so when you leave to go to your next job, if you have kept track of your successes, it's very easy. And don't be shy when you're like, hey, like, I love you as a recommender. Don't be shy to remind them, like, here are the things that, I feel like I did really well on. And I remember you saying that, XYZ was like a really good example of whatever, right? Like, so when people tell you you're doing a good job, keep track of that and be assertive in that way, but also be like kind and cooperative whenever you can, because that sticks out. We're all humans, so that sticks out a lot more than than I would have maybe imagined. And I think than most people would imagine is like just being a good person.
Thank you. I really love those comments. I don't know if it's a misconception or if other people really think this way, but sometimes it can feel like success or achievement in the workplace. It feels like a zero-sum game. Like if someone gets, a bunch of accolades and you did it, like, does that mean that, they're going to get all the promotions and you're not? And it's like, no, I think for me, it's just remembering that the team does better, together, and just like remembering how important it is to build other people up and call out their achievements as well, and not worry about, what about me? The focus is the focus. There's enough focus and enough spotlight and enough reward for everyone, and to try to. I know that can be easier said than done, and that's very sector specific too. But it does create, like you say, just a better workplace, just being better humans. We should all work towards that. Lydia.
I just want to add, like, to what you were saying, Alana. If you are truly mission focused, which I think you should be in your work, because otherwise, like, why are you spending all this time and energy doing it? If you're truly focused on, like, me, like, educating the world about climate change, or whatever you're doing, like, you know, focusing on diplomacy, or Evan saying you're focusing on peace, then it shouldn't matter like who's getting the credit. It just should matter that you're making progress in that field. So I think if you focus on like what you really want to bring to the world, you're going to be a way better coworker, because you're going to really care that the work gets done. And it doesn't matter if you helped your colleague achieve it or if you achieved it yourself. You're doing good things in the world and you're helping make that happen. So I think it's much easier to work collaboratively when you're working in a field that you actually care about.
Such a beautiful point. I love that.
I know this is our last question, and I hate to make this drag on, but Lydia, everything you're saying is resonating with me a lot. And I want to echo that also to say that that to just reiterate that success isn't a single thing. And also one thing that I would like for our engaged participants to be thinking about is that you are the one that defines your success. I think if you're looking for a more concrete definition, it can be how equipped you are for the next step that you'd like to take, which is entirely up to you. So it doesn't necessarily have to mean being at the top of your organization, or as Lydia was saying, being the loudest and most achieved person. How equipped are you according to your own personal assessment is maybe a more concrete way to put that.
Thank you, Evan. Emily or Frank? Emily.
I just want to say that I agree with everything you've said. I don't have anything to add on to that. I think that was perfect. I'll just stick to being a good person, never forget that, and work hard.
And I think maybe Zoom and, you know, the last 12 months or so has kind of exacerbated this point, but just the people that are the most fun to work with, the people who just the importance of being a good listener and of asking questions, and of I think one of the best ways to you know, to show respect for your coworkers is to, you know, to ask questions of them and to help them develop their ideas and to help them kind of tease out their points. Those are, you know, that's something that I've found really, that's made some of these Zoom calls with coworkers at the organization I work with go a heck of a lot smoother. And it's, you know, it's equally true in person, you know, when we're in kind of the, you know, soul crushing meeting rooms. So just to, you know, the importance of remembering to be a good listener and to ask curious questions about the folks you're working with.
Thank you so much. I think we should end on this really positive, motivating note. I want to thank Sam and Katherine for moderating the panel. You had such wonderful questions that brought out a lot of excellent insight from our panelists. Emily, Frank, Lydia, and Evan, thank you for this conversation. I found it invigorating, and I'm ready to go figure out my next steps and take a hike and rewrite my mission statement. I love this all so much. Thank you to all of our co-sponsors, to the International Institute, and to our communications team for getting the word out. We appreciate you all. And this will be up on the International Institute YouTube page by next week. So feel free to share it out widely. Okay, with that, we will say goodbye. Thanks.